So this is our scene and we are looking through the main camera. As you can see, we have 3 bottles are hitting the ground after 5 frames. This is the master animation helper, which all these bottles are connected to it, parented to it. And what happened is that we animated this helper for 5 frames. That's it, simple. So remember something, the 5 frames are very small amount of time. If we would just work with 25 frames per second, which is BAL here, this is like fifth of seconds, which is very small amount of time, and we have to account for that because in later stage when we start simulating things, it's very small amount of time for the liquid to move, and that means we may expect some strange behavior for the liquid and we may need to increase the steps. I really and strongly recommend not to increase these steps except if we need it. The idea is that not because it's slow or something, of course it will be slower when the steps are more, as you will see, but it will be realistic more if we will go with 1 step for every frame for the simulator, and we will discover that during the work. Another thing to account for here is that the scene scale. This is very important matter, and I just advise to start with it correctly. So if we go here, we see that we have centimeters in the unit setup, and we also put centimeters in the system unit setup, and this is what we will work with. So our scene scale is in centimeters, and we have to compare this or the scale of our bottles to the real life. Now there are some few things you have to understand in such scenarios with the tabletop shots, is that usually when you work at that in real life, we don't work with real world scales. I mean, when we want to create something which is like really slow and specifically forms certain kind of splash or reaction between the objects and the liquid, we don't use the real liquids, neither we use the real scale. So sometimes we make these bottles bigger and we bought a liquid which is not water, sometimes it's like kerosene or something, which has less viscosity and less density, and we do the hit and we get some results which is more beautiful than what we get from water. And that means sometimes we need to account to have bigger bottles to get the same result we expect here in 3D. And what I will do now is that even I don't need to measure these bottles now, but all what I care for is how the simulator gonna give me the dimensions. This is the most important thing. So if I will jump to the top view and I will go to liquid simulator here, so I will go to create panel and Phoenix FD, and I will pick up the liquid simulator. I can just draw very simple liquid simulator around them. It doesn't have to be big enough to contain everything. Remember, if you look from the camera, there are some areas here and here which is not covered by the simulator, but it doesn't really matter that much in this stage because we need just to initiate the simulation and understand where we are standing. So I can just increase the height a little. I need it to be at the bottom of these bottles. Also I need it to be bigger. So let's go to the modify panel and let's go to the grid. In the grid here I can input some numbers, and the most important things are the numbers here. So as you can see, the Z here, which is the height of this container, is 22 centimeters, which is considered the height of normal bottle, which is almost right. So what we will do now is that we start increasing these numbers, or just put some numbers randomly before we set up everything as we think it should be. So what I can do now, as you can see, the steps here are big, and more smaller steps, or what we call it voxels. Smaller voxels mean more accurate work. So I can just reduce this to start with to 0.11 as example, and I can just put some numbers here. So I will start with 400, and maybe like let's go a little for like under 300, and here I will increase this to be more than 300 just to have almost something like that, which I think it will be enough for us to start with. And now what I will do is that I can go to the output and set up the output before we start simulating anything. And I can do that simply by going here and just browsing to a certain place. I will call it like the cache files, and here it's for the water, so I will call this water. I can just separate it from the numbers and I will say yes, save. So we have everything almost ready, but before we continue here, let's set up the relationship between the liquid container and the bottles. So what we can do is that we can go to scene interaction. First, let's just pick up all these and understand what we are dealing with. If we will start simulating directly, we need to make sure that we have closed geometry and that our geometry is clean. And as you can see here, I think we have some problem with the cover. Is the cover a part of this bottle? No. So it's good. This bottle is one geometry. If we will just go to wireframe, it's one geometry, and I think it's closed, but we can make sure by going to modify panel, and we can just press S to go to STL. STL is basically a tool here which can check that our geometry is closed. So all I need to do is to press check, and it's doing its work, and will come back to me to say no error. So it's closed geometry. I think it applies for other bottles because they are the same. So all I need to do is to start the simulation. And remember, if I will go here and discover more about the geometry, all I need to do is to go to perspective, and I will isolate this by pressing this button or Alt Q, and let's go to geometry level, and this is it. So it's modeled as exactly as in real life. So we expect the reaction or the behavior of the liquid to be as if this is a real bottle, but we will see that we may need to change few things to get the reaction we need. So this is it. Now all I need to do is to go back and display all the bottles. We don't need to include the cover in this stage because the water will not jump and enter here, but in later stage we need to put something to close this. And if we will check this geometry also, we will see that this geometry is very simple. It doesn't have width, which I can solve by creating some width using shell, but I don't need really to do that. So we will see in later stage how we can close this. But for now, everything seems good, and all I need to go is to go to the simulator. I prefer to go to include list, and I will uncheck exclude hidden object. Means all the objects I will pick up here, even if they are hidden, they will be a part of the simulation. And I can just add this one, and this one. I allowed myself to go and name these bottles, and I prefer this kind of naming convention. So the idea is that I start with bottle, which is the most expected name to name a bottle. Then I follow that with some position where they are, the middle, left, and right. So now I will go to my camera, and I think my scene is good, and I can just save the scene. I can call it step 1 as example. So all I need to go is to go to steps, and I will call it step or start 1. And this is our first step, which now we will start simulating and seeing what can happen. Now, as you can see, we don't have any liquid down here, and we need to have some liquid, so we have that splash. So how to create a liquid? Here in Phoenix FD, the process is easy enough. all we need to do is to go to dynamics and just fill the container with a certain amount of water. I would say 5 is good, but I always tend to go a smaller amount or thinner amount because I want this to be like a layer of water on the bottom. So I can say 3, and we can change this later, but for now that's what I want. And let's see something else here. We have 35 million, which is very big amount of voxels, and what we can do is that we can decrease the resolution to have something really affordable, so we can work with it, which is low resolution, and after that we can start working with smaller steps or smaller cell size and bigger amount of cells. But for now 2 millions and almost half is good amount. So that's for the start, and we can start our first simulation. Can go to simulation and we can define the frames. So we have 200 frames here. I don't want to do the 200 frames, but it's a good idea always to set up your frames at the beginning. I want to start from 0 and I want to end up at 200. So we can start from here, or we can go here and start the simulation. So as you can see, we have a display which we can see all the particles here, but actually we have to go to preview and adjust a few things so we see exactly what we need to see. So in preview here, as you can see, there is this detail reduction, and basically if I will increase this number, the amount of particles displayed here, it will change, but this is not the actual, this will not reflect the actual particles in our scene. So in 0, this is the amount of particles we have. But usually when the amount of particles are really big, we need to start introducing some numbers here, which gonna allow us to display less particles. We see with the behavior, but we don't have to consume the RAMs with more particles. Also, we can display the mesh, and that will give us more or better idea about how the liquid is behaving. And we can just go like this, and it's very easy. And actually it's cheap, like very fast, as you can see. So what we can do now is, I don't need to see the mesh in this stage, but we are displaying now the liquids. Remember, we don't have any other things, like we don't have foam, or we don't have other elements. Maybe we'll add some, but I don't think in this scene for the main water here in the ground we need to introduce some foam. Foam, of course, it's the same as bubbles, because we will be studying that in the later stage inside the bottles here. Sometimes I add some foam with similar situations because it will add some bubbles, which shouldn't be that much, but it's there sometimes. So that's what we do now, and let's check the numbers. So first, if you go to the side view and see, this is the height of the water, and I think it's suitable. It's not high a lot, but it's good. And I think there's no problems or issues with the penetration. Something like here we can see, but we can solve that easily. So first thing, let's prevent these particles from going down. And although we have this ground, but we didn't account for it or put it inside the interaction menu. So I can go to interaction and I can add the ground. So TY flow collision ground, because we will use it in a later stage for other things. But also sometimes I don't need really to account for it or put it here. All I need to do is to go, because it's aligned exactly with the bottom of the simulator, I can go to the dynamic, sorry, the grid, and here I can just choose to close the container. So I can jam it in Z, which is the height from bottom and top, but all I need to do is to close it from bottom, because this is what I really need. So jam in minus means that here it's solid, nothing gonna go down. And also I can jam it from other parts, but I really don't need to. It's better idea to jam it here, especially when you have some liquids, like initial state like this, which is like a C or something, the idea is that it will even change the reaction of how the liquid can react of any hit. So as you can see also is that the liquid here has a small amount of reaction, and we will try to increase this ongoing. But again, let's check some numbers. If I will go to simulation, I can see here the amount of particles. If you will go to 0 and just start going like this, we see that some of the particles are leaving our container, and usually when you have less amount of voxels or cells, this will keep the number here. So we have 74 or 75 thousands of them, which is really small. For the final simulation, we at least we have to account for 2 or 3 millions of particles to get something decent, and that will affect everything, including the liquid behavior as well as the meshing, because we need to have very smooth mesh of liquid. So what I will do now is that I will re-simulate this by pressing the same start button and see the result. We close this down so no particles are going down. So now we have something, but again we need to see how we can just make it more realistic, reacting more with our movement, and that's what we will do next. So what defines the relationship between the particles and the collision objects is actually this factor, which we will right mouse button on all these buttons because we'll change it the same. So we'll go right mouse button and we will go to Phonics FD properties, and here we can find the motion velocity effect, which can define how much these particles are affecting this liquid, and we can change this number to get something decent. Now what I want to do is to increase the reaction here. So if I will go like 5 as example, which is a really big number, and start simulating again, we have some reaction, which is nice, but I don't have enough particles to see the reaction. I can go here and in the preview I can deactivate the mesh a little to see something. As you can see, we have some reaction and it's nice, but it's not enough because I want this to be chaotic more and I need to see something going up, really up. So I have a lot of options. One of the options which I really like is to customize the geometry, and we need to do that for later stages also, because I want to separate or just consider other collision geometry rather than the one I want to render in the final stage. So what we can do is to go to 0, and here I can start doing few simple steps. Now I don't want to use these into the simulation. I need to duplicate them. So what I can do is that I can select them all. I can just clone them. Of course, I mean copy, not instance, and I can isolate these bottles. So if you can see, I have these bottles, and what I can do is that I can call them just as they are, but I will add the word collision here. And I will do the same for all these. So we have a collision object now. So what is the difference between these objects and the original objects, which are the bottles? The actual difference is that we can just reduce the amount of faces we have to work with. Also, I prefer to close this geometry, so I work with bigger volume rather than thin glass, and you'll see that this will affect the final simulation for sure. So what I can do is that I can go to one of them and I can just start working on deleting the inner side. So all I need to do is to pick up the inner side. It's already picked here, but I can just do it again. So all we need to do is to go to ignore back facing. So if I will choose this, it will choose certain faces, which is I don't pick up the one in the other side. Also, I can define how much I will pick the kind of faces which by angle, so 15 degrees, all the faces which has less than 15 degrees, it will be picked. So I can press Control, I can start adding to this. But what I will do is that I will pick up or pick the inner faces. Just by one click, I almost have everything picked up. Also, I need to go here inside and make sure that I'm picking the button. So this is it. I think I don't need also this row and maybe this row. Yeah, so I will delete these faces and I will come here because I have now this edge, and I will close it, going to cup. So now I have closed geometry, almost half the amount of faces, and it's hollow inside, but basically it's a solid object. So I will do that for the other two bottles and I will come back. So now we have the three bottles, and all we need to do is to include them in the simulation. So basically what I will do is that I will just hide the other bottles, and what I will do is that I will display everything. So now I have these bottles and they are parented to the same point here because they are a copy of the original bottles. And now I can go to the simulator here in the scene interaction, and I can remove the previous ones and add those ones. And also I don't need to add the ground because the ground of the simulator is closed. So that's all I need. Can go to the simulator again and start simulating things to see what would be the result. So jumping to the camera, I can start simulating again. Almost the same reaction. That's good, but now I don't need to really account for anything like how thick or thin the geometry is, and I have less amount of geometry. Two things to take in consideration here which are really important. The first thing is that this kind of resolution which we are working with now is so low, and it doesn't really reflect the actual result we need to expect. Sometimes you work with this resolution and have something nice you like. When you increase the resolution, it will change dramatically. So what I mean about the resolution, the cell size. When we reduce the cell size, we will have more particles and the behavior will change. So I advise and recommend to work with something like mid-ground, high or higher than this, but at least is more close to the final result. This is one. And the second thing is that when you change the steps, you also get different results. So if you will go here to the dynamics, and here steps per frame will increase this or decrease it, sometimes we get different result because basically there are calculations between frames, and so there are collisions, there are a lot of things happening inside the simulator. So we just take these two things in consideration. That's why in the final stage, when you have everything as expected and all the numbers here, don't expect to come here to the grid and increase the resolution or decrease the steps here and get the result you have in your mind. Sometimes it changes. Now what we will do is we need to modify the height of this splash. It looks like really low and we need it to be really high. So first thing, let's check this. I will pick up all these and I will go to Phonics FD properties. As you can notice, it's still 5, so it's motion velocity effect, which is 5. means the same as the original bottles. We can increase this to increase the reaction, but I prefer to follow other way now and see what we can do else. We can actually decrease the gravity by going to the simulator, and let's go to the dynamic. We can see that we have gravity here. When we decrease or increase the gravity, it will change the behavior of the liquid. Basically, it will have less force, which is bringing it back to the ground, and by doing that we allow it to go higher. So if I will decrease this to 0.5 and start simulating again, we can see that it's higher now. And I can jump between this frame and this frame. This is the previous one and this is the current one. I have now the liquid, but the idea is that it's just not high enough, and I don't want to change this more than it should be. I try to keep it 1 in this stage, change other things to get more splash, and then I can just change this in a later stage, because that will give us the illusion that everything is slow. So let's do something else. What can we do? We can go to the grid, and here in the grid we can see that we have the scene scale. This is extremely important. So if you just look here, we have 33 centimeters for the height, which if we will measure the height of this bottle, it's like 23 centimeters, which is exactly or almost the right height of the bottle in the real world. So sometimes, as I mentioned at the beginning of this lecture, is that in real life sometimes we introduce bigger bottles, and when we introduce these bigger bottles, we expect them to react or interact with the water or with the liquid differently to form better, or let's say more beautiful splash, and we can use that actually to do the same here. So if I will increase this, let's say to 10, and start simulating things, you can see that I have more splash now, and actually it's almost the shape I expect or I want. I can stop it here. So this is what I want. Actually, this is more close to what I want rather than what we have before. It's chaotic, it's nice, and I can check it from other views, but of course I need to have more details to understand what's happening there. But in general, it's moving as we expected. Let's check it from other views. If we'll go here, the top view, it will give us really good idea about what we are doing. So if you look carefully, we'll see that we have the what we call crown shape of splash, but it's not exactly the ideal one, and the idea is that we need to introduce a few other modifications or factors here to shape or draw the shape of the splash more. So one of the things which we can use is actually here on dynamic, we can increase the surface tension, and the surface tension will tend to connect the particles more with each other and will reduce the amount of gaps here, but of course with a little amount, because we don't need to increase it much, especially that we are dealing with water, and there are limits to do that with water, else it will be like behaving different than we expect from water to behave. Other than that, the droplet breakup, so if you increase this, we will allow these drops to the water drops to separate in earlier stages, but I think they are good now and we don't really need to increase this. Also, if you increase this, it will increase the processing time. I don't think we need to do that, but we need to do this here in later stage. Also, we have the viscosity, which if we will introduce a little viscosity, let's go to 0.1, which is I think very much. If we do that, it will increase the processing time slightly, but it will change the shape of the water. If I go to next frame, look, it was chaotic more, now it's less chaotic, more connected to each other. So I can try here by going 0 and then increase this to, as example, 0.2, which is, you know, a good amount, and see what would be the behavior. It's still good, but again, I can just increase this to 2 as example and see what's gonna happen. They are connected more, and if you can see, we have longer shape for the splash, which we can really use. So what happened is that some of these drops will be able to break this connection and go out. Most of them, they will not be able to do that. So the difference between this one and the other one is that we have more drops here. So I will bring this back to 0 in this stage, and what I will do is that I will increase the resolution, because now it's like, it looks like it's a good time for us to see some more details. All I need to do is to go here and I can increase the resolution a little. So if I go like 9 millions, almost 10 millions, it's a good amount which we can check everything and see how everything is moving. I'm just displaying the mesh here because the mesh not actually slowing my system, and I have really very simple computer here. I wanted to do everything with a normal computer because I expect you to have just a different kind of processing power. So this is very affordable and it can happen in a very small computer. So what we can do is go here and check everything. I think it's a time to do higher resolution simulation to see the behavior. It's not final resolution because we need to change a few things, but it's good to check in this stage. So we can run the simulation now and see what's gonna happen. And as I mentioned before, because we increased the resolution of the container, we can expect different behavior and we have to adjust that. But in this stage, the amount of divisions here is fairly mid-ground, and we will see how everything is doing. Then we will change accordingly. And I think it's fast enough, so I don't need to stop it now, but let's see how chaotic it can be. Yeah, it's chaotic. It's nice, everything seems good, but it's a little more chaotic than we need. I can stop the simulation here and I can go back a little frames. Since the beginning here, we don't have a shape for the splash we need, so I prefer to have something like curvy, more connected than it does here. And also we have very high, they are moving very high, so we can reduce that too. But this is good, and what we can do is that we can just do few changes and see what's gonna happen. So the first thing I can do is that I can go down and in dynamic I can just control two things, I think two things, to make this behaving differently. Of course we can animate the parameters here, and that is so good, else it will be difficult to control to art direct the liquids. So what I will do is that I will go to the viscosity and I will start introducing just a little amount of viscosity. As example, here in the beginning of time, I will say 0.005, which is really small amount, but at least it will give it some kind of internal drag, what we call. And for the surface tension, I can increase this to 0.1 as example, and we can start the simulation again. Remember, I have one step, and also that's contributing very much with the shape of the water. Now I can see it's very slight different, but between this one and this one it's more connected, and we can increase this or push this even further to get more connected liquid. Let's jump to the fifth frame, and here I can introduce different numbers for both. I can increase this, like, let's say 25 5 times, and also I can increase this to 1. And what I'm doing now is that when the collision is happening here, I want the surface tension to be very strong, which will not allow the particles to break up or just move as in this shape, just separately. Then I can decrease it directly, so I can jump to 7 as example, or 8, and I can change the numbers back again. So I can go to the surface tension and I can bring it back to 0.1. I can do that with the viscosity as well. So I will go here and 0.5 always. And most of the time, if I'm not working with open sea surface like big scale water, I introduce some viscosity, because without viscosity a lot of things will not work. As example, stickiness, so the particles or the liquid will not stick with the bottles, let's say surface, so I will not get any kind of sliding or whatever, and that's totally connected or related to the viscosity, which we need to account for. Even a small amount of this will work well. So if you want the liquid to stick with something and slide, it's very important to increase the viscosity, else it will not do what you expect it to do. In this stage, let's try again. Now, as you can see, it's slower, and it's just not much, but it's slower because we introduced more surface tension. It's connected more, and I can check that here. So compared to this and this, we have more connected liquid. And what I can do is that I can again increase maybe the surface tension. I will have something here more connected than this. Let's do that again. It's moving down. Okay. I think we have something nice here, but we can always change it. That's nice. We can always increase this number. Let's try like 5 as example here. It's a lot, but I need to see them connected more. They are connected more. They are not separating to a later stage, which is much better. I like this, but I'm getting this shape more than this shape, which I don't like much. So in this stage, if you look here, you'll find that they are connected more, and I have some of them separating before the others. That's good, but what I will do, I will go here and decrease this to 2, and I will change other thing. I'll go to step per frame, which is extremely important to consider that. Now everything is working well, there's no problems in penetrating the geometry or some unexpected behavior for the liquid. But what I can do here, and it's important, is that when you increase the steps per frame, you will get more smoother liquid shape, and that's even explained in the documents, the help documents of the Phonics FD. You can check that. But again, if you introduce more steps here, I don't want to really increase that, but that will smooth the shape of the mesh. So if I will go to 2, which is not much at all, I don't want to change the behavior, but I need to change the shape of the mesh. Of course, that will increase the time for the simulation, but it's not much. Now you can see that directly there is a big difference between this one and this one. So now we can see that most of the mesh is connected down here, and some of the drops will go up, which is nice. This is before and this is now. This is now. We have this thing which I like so much. I like this to be connected. If we look at it from top view, and I don't need to display the particles and the mesh. This is like consuming and absolutely not necessary. So I'll go and just hide one of them. So I will hide this, which is the particles, and I'll go back to my camera and look at it from here, or even from top view here. I can see that things are behaving in a way which is really nice. Still, I can reduce this randomness here and come back the collision to be just inside a certain place, but that's nice and acceptable. Also, I can always go here and change the motion velocity factor. You can just increase it, you can decrease it, you can introduce different numbers and just see. That will affect the splash, but again, that will affect the general impact. The shape of the water is more controlled by the dynamic rollout, so that's good for now. And what I can do is that I can increase the resolution again and see the shape of the splash. And also, let's do two things before we jump to higher resolution. And as you can see, we have just 200 and maybe 90,000 particles, which are not much at all. When we increase the resolution, that will be connected more and it will be even better shaped. So I can go to dynamics and think of two things. One, the time scale. When I increase or decrease the time scale, that basically will change also the wave behavior or the splash behavior. So in this kind of shots, as you saw tabletop, you can check tabletop food or liquid simulation or even real ones, and you can see that most of them are slow motion. We need to test with this. We can always decrease this number so much and see what's gonna happen, and we can retime everything later in a later stage, like slow it down. But let's test with this. At least let's go to 0.8. I tend to do that a little, and it will just make it behaving smoother. Remember, when you increase the steps per frame, basically you need to change the time scale to get the same results. But again, if you look at it, we have the same shape here, which is so good, which I like the most. Here it's big, we can reduce it, but we have those also coming up. I wanna actually increase it, and what I can do is that I can now introduce some gravity, so I can reduce this to 0. Any number and see the behavior again. So the shape will be more like this than this. That will increase the height. Let's wait a little and see the whole thing. That's big. Of course, we don't need it to be that big for sure. We have the liquid coming from in between the bottles, which is nice. But I don't like this shape. I like more like this. Anyway, it's behaving in a good way. That's it. This is huge. We don't want it to be like that, but of course remember the limits of the container is here, so we have to extend it anyway at the end, and we have better distribution for the water inside the container. So let me just try to increase the resolution a little and see what's gonna happen. Now let's do good amount of particles, and what we will do is let's change this, let's increase this like 2 times as example. 35 millions is very decent amount of particles, and this is what I expect the final resolution can be, and based on how much particles we will get here, because now we don't know, this is just the cells amount, and based on that we know that we will increase it or decrease it a little. I think we need to increase it, but also we have to account that we need to increase the width and the depth of this container, which can increase the total amount of cells. Anyway, few things we can change. So simulate air effect, although this is mostly going to be affecting the liquid and as well as the white particles when we are simulating big scale water, but it also introduced some kind of drag here, which I like, so I will activate it. I can just decrease this a little, maybe 3. We didn't really introduce animation, but it's just here. So for this I will just decrease it a little, and I will allow the particles, some of the particles, to go really high. The steps are the same, I don't need to change things here. And wetting, I will add wetting. Wetting will allow us to calculate or simulate these wetting particles, which gonna be attached to the geometry, and it will allow us to even in a later stage put some kind of wet material for the glass where the water is touching the glass. But because we will create separate procedural system for the drops, I don't think that will affect much, but we can activate it in case we wanna use it later. I don't want to change anything here. Other than that, I would say I will keep everything as it is. The show mesh, I don't have to show it during the simulation, but I wanna show it later. And also we may need to change the mesh here, because if you see we have a mesh which I don't think it's suitable for what we are doing now. I may change it to cap mesh or ocean mesh. Actually I prefer cap mesh because I don't need to calculate the edges of this mesh or the bottom part. I just need the top part of this mesh, which gonna blend with my ground in a later stage, and it will fit perfectly with the render, so it will look like it's extended to infinite somehow. And based on that I will change some of the settings here. So let's do this and let's simulate, and I will come back after this. Will just simulate few, or let's say good amount of frames, so we watch everything, and I expect to see something like a better distribution for the particles, smoother mesh of course, as well as some good shape of the splash you expected. So I will pause the video and I will run simulation. I will come back again when I have some frames. Good. Now I have some few frames. What I did is that because I don't have any simulation here in the first 3 frames, I just started the simulation from 3. So I went here to the simulation. I can just close all this to simulation, and I started from 3. And that's it. Everything else is as it is, and I have 1 million and something particles, which in the final one, when I increase the volume and everything for the simulator, I expect to go at least above 2 millions and half or 3 millions, which gonna really introduce better mesh, and there's no flickering or anything like that. But for now, let's check everything. I can go little by little. Here is the first collision. Let's say I can just deactivate this. I want to move frame by frame, and as you can see I have a really very fine details, and it's still connected. There is no much splash. I love this, and this is actually what I wanted to have, like the bottom part of it is connected, and I have some splash here. Some of these are between the buttons, which is really nice. Now I can see how beautiful is this here, because this is what I wanted. Let me just press far away so we can see the right splash. Now we can reshape this so it will be like that, but I don't like that. You know, it's just logically it should be doing this, because these particles actually were here and they just get pushed by the motion velocity effect. So I expect this behavior, and this is nice. And I can just go a few frames more. Now we can see until here, even 21 or something, we have connected mesh. That's extremely important for me. So I don't have just drops, and I don't have just one connected mesh. I have both, and I love these. And we have also some connected mesh here. Maybe we'll need to change a few things, like if I will jump here to the top view and I will look, I have all the mesh here, and also I have the bottom part of it, so I don't need to account for that. I can just press this right mouse button and convert it into box, so I can see under. Yeah, I have everything here. I don't need this mesh, neither this mesh on the edges, and eventually I don't want to render it because it will consume my resources more, so no need for that. But I can go back a little and see the crown shape, which is good, fairly good. I can work on it more, but that's it for me. I think this is exactly what I am seeking here. It's very good, very fast, no problems at all. So I can jump to the camera, and I can pick up this and go to meshing. Let's change the meshing mode. So if we go to rendering here, we have mesh. I don't like to deal with mesh on this situation because I don't need to account for a lot of faces. I can jump to ocean mesh or cup mesh, and the difference between these is that I need just the top surface of the mesh, so I will go to cup mesh. If I press it here, it will be dark. So basically what happens is that the level here, the ocean level, is 50, which is above, and you know what we did here is that we put the ocean level to 3, so I need to change the same number. So I will go here and change this into 3. That's it. Perfect. Now I have these artifacts, small artifacts, which I do to some drops coming down, and sometimes it's just randomly because the mesh need to be smooth again. So I can introduce some smoothness, 1, and that's good. So I reduce this, and also I always tend to activate this use particle, a liquid particle, which can also smooth the mesh more, and it will take care of the ends. So now I have something decent. For the ocean subdivision, this is important when we are working with infinite ocean surface. For now, it doesn't really make some difference, and also it makes big difference when we having displacement, when we have some small waves for the displacement. If we don't increase this, we will have some kind of jittering or some noise in the horizon. So I don't need really to change these. The horizon roughness the same. I just will keep it like this. That's it. We don't need to introduce any cutter geometry as we will do for the liquid inside the bottles, but for now all I need is there. And I think if I will jump to this view again, I will show you the mesh from here. You can see I only have the top surface of the mesh. In a later stage like here, when everything's breathing and I have the wave, I have this thing which is like a step, which I can try to improve by going and just here reducing this 2.9 as example. It didn't change much, so if I go 2 and maybe 3.2, that will cut it exactly on the level I want, because I need it to fit with the mesh. But again, from this perspective or this view, I don't need to think about it because I will extend these edges both ways. So 3 is good. Now we need to introduce the ice cubes, and the idea about that is that the scenario says is that we need to introduce some ice cubes from underground that are coming up and pushing the liquids even more, but in a controllable way. So we don't want to create really big chaos, and they will be jumping up and going down to hit the ground, which we have here, the box, and that will allow us to have even much more interesting movement. And we will do that using the only, I would say, acceptable dynamic system for Max, which is TY-Flow. Else we usually do that using real flow. I don't really like to do it using particle flow because it's not that stable. I don't think it will go well or interact right with the Phonics FT. But what happened is that TY-Flow is going well with Phonics FT, and there are some nodes which we will introduce and see, which are designed to have mutual interaction between the liquid and the cubes. So let's do that.